Hello, I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're jumping right in with the guests doing something a little different this week. I have Robert Spearing and Ron James with us today. We're going to be talking about what's coming up at the MUFON Symposium this year. I'm excited to be going out there. I know at least Bob's making a road trip. So this is a pre record because he's going to be driving. How many thousand miles is that?
I guess 2,000, 2,000 miles.
2,000 miles. You just don't want to fly. And I get that. I know a lot of people that just do not want to fly. So I understand that. But anyway, and I also have Ron from out on the West Coast. And Ron, we'll be seeing you there as well. I'm really excited to be hanging out with both of you guys.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah. And there's a lot going on this year. I don't know who wants to start, but let's just jump right in and let's talk about some of the things that we can look for. And then I do want to discuss this also. There's kind of a turning of events in an investigation that Ron is involved in. And basically, I don't know, do we want to call it a possible hoax? Is that what we may call this, Ron? Or what would you like to call it?
I haven't gotten to the point where I can call the entire case a hoax. But one of the images that was provided to us has definitely been debunked. And, that's okay with us. In this particular case, we've got literally dozens of images that all need to be researched. And so we're glad that we're able to put one aside and explain it.
That's right. And that's the thing when you present something and there's all these eyeballs on it, people dive right in and, become their own little investigators. And I think it's a good thing, because there's so many great, unexplained things in this topic that, we need to weed out the ones that can be explained. And there's still plenty left, plenty of mystery
Martin,
left.
it opened my eyes to the tremendous effectiveness of the internet. And honestly, there are other cases, there's other images that we're considering looking at a way to involve people in helping us get to the bottom of them, because my own personal logs are backlogs of stuff to investigate is knee deep. MUFON's got a big backlog of stuff to investigate. And, it seems like the power of the internet could be harnessed for positive outcomes in this stuff.
Yeah. So why don't we just, if it's all right with you, why don't we just go right through this since we're right here on the topic, and then we'll get into other things. Just since
I think that's a good idea. I mean, this was a very controversial thing a couple of weeks ago. I think they did 5 episodes on that show, Vetted, just about me in these images. I was lauded and lambasted at the same time. The internet is very unforgiving sometimes, and it's also very supportive. So yeah, let's talk about that case.
Okay,
Bob, do you have anything you wanted to talk about first?
No. You start off with the case, the 1955 case.
Now I don't have a picture per se of the image itself, but you can see it here on the right hand side of the screen, a very small image of it. But so I want you to talk about the turn of events once this image was exposed, Ron. How did it go?
Well, we received this image and a tranche of other images and a story about a relative who had supposedly flown with a squadron that shot down a flying saucer in the 1950s. And certainly something like that's pretty exciting. And there was a tranche of images that came from different sources in different times that were all part of the story. And this was one of the images. And it was supposedly a UFO crash site. And so I shared it reluctantly. I wasn't really going to put it out there because we were still investigating it, but I showed it to some people online during the Vetted show, and I was happy to do it. And some people were able to actually discover that it was a model kit, that the human figures were from a model kit that wasn't even put out until 1984. And if you look at the image on the lower right, there's 2 guys in front of the flying saucer that seem to be very similar to the guy sitting in the chair and the guy standing up. But it wasn't conclusive 100% to me until another version of the image surfaced on the web. And there's also, very hard to see in this one, another guy sitting to the right under that big tree. And he has his arm extended exactly like the guy in the lower right of this image. And so at that point, there was really no you know, trying to salvage that this was any kind of an authentic photo. It was clearly a diorama that somebody built and took a picture of. And that was something we thought about in the beginning, but I couldn't personally find the soldiers themselves in the images to match. And so, you know, it was still a mystery. And the internet solved it. And I thought that was fantastic. They solved it in about 2 hours.
Well, you know, it kind of reminds me of back when the Roswell slides, you know, came out, and everybody, that anticipation. And then when I first saw the image, you know, I'm not going to say that I knew anything, but I just thought, well, that doesn't, you know, there's something wrong about that. That's all I thought. But those guys dug right in. That whole team of people dug right in, and they figured out exactly what that thing was. And
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
Mummygate. It didn't take long, did it?
Mummygate. Yeah, it's great. You know, it's great that I think, you know, there's two ways of doing it. You know, searching for the truth is great, but to be cruel to a person that is putting it out there, I think that happened quite a bit to you. I saw some of the comments, and
Yeah, that was pretty unexpected because I never held that image up and said, hey, this is a UFO crash scene. I just said it's part of an investigation that we're doing, and that if the case turned out to not be legitimate, we'd be the first ones to come forward and share that information. So there was nothing that we were doing that was deceptive in any way. And the fact that some people just latched onto it and decided to attack me, you know, I guess. But
yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the broader community understood that there was nothing nefarious about the fact that I shared part of an investigation.
Yeah, no, yeah, but it is pretty powerful that this can be. You know, you said 2 hours. I can't believe it, because they had to go right in with some type of really close inspection of those figures to be able to get a match somehow. I don't know how.
I know, and you know, we probably would have been able to figure that out at some point. With one of our people that was working on it would have went through all of those model kits and all of those military figurines. But frankly, somebody saved us a lot of investigative time, and I'm appreciative of it. And it did create quite a stir. Somebody told me there are actually memes that people made of me. They took the image of me holding up the picture and they switched out, like I'm holding up a picture of a Lego model or I'm holding up a transformer. And so I think by the time it was all said and done, there was like 300,000 views across all the different shows that I did and all the different vetted episodes. And I have a guy that helps me with publicity, and he said, the only bad publicity is if they misspell your name. So
Yeah.
I'm not complaining, even though I'm a little sunburned from some of the things I had to endure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. There's a lot more people that I would say that are in support of you know, getting the truth than there are the people that want to be, you know, someone behind a keyboard being nasty, you know. So you just have to. That's how I have to look at, you know, even on this show, every show I do, you know, there's always the people making the negative comments. It's just the way it is. You know, you have to deal with it, and we all have to have thick skin, or, you know, we would have stopped a long time ago if we didn't, really.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, anybody who's familiar with the work that I do, you know, I made Accidental Truth, and that's a film that won 28 Film Festival awards. It's been called one of the best UFO documentaries ever. That's the new one coming out.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
Accidental Truth came out
Next
last year. That one's coming out in fall. You know, and at the end of the day, nobody has debunked anything in my film, which is something to say considering it's a UFO film.
That's right.
So, you know, anybody who wants to make fun of me for holding up an image, they should dig a little deeper and find out what I do.
That's right. That's right. All right, Bob, it's your turn. So let's hear what you're going to be involved in at the symposium.
Well, I just want to continue a little bit with this
Sure,
Oregon case from the 50s.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of other pictures. There were letters from the witness that was involved. We were able to correlate in the nightcap chronology that something was going on with fighter jets that week and UFOs in Oregon. So just based on one bad photo, there's so much more to this case that I really think that it's legitimate, but that somewhere along the line, some family member didn't know what they were given to the other family member, and, you know, some possibly bogus stuff got in, but the rest of the case is pretty solid. Okay, so
That's interesting.
so basically Saturday night, the presentation that Ron and I will be doing, there's going to be 4 sets of cases. I'm doing one. It's the Russian sample that we got from Moscow, from a fellow in Moscow, and then Ron will be presenting the Oregon case and 2 other cases, which he could talk about after I bring up this Russian case. So the Russian sample basically has a very odd history. The person who contacted us claimed that he was part of a UFO group in Moscow, would do deep C5 meditations, and that he began to have materialize around him. So we figured, okay, this is a contactee type guy. We said, send it to us. We'll send it to the MUFON lab. He goes, I will, but I've already had it tested twice in Moscow, and it turned out that the lab that did it could only identify 10% of it. It was an odd combination of copper, barium, iron, arsenic, and 2 other elements I can't think of off the top of my head. And the other 90% he couldn't identify. He mails it to Lynn Mann, who is our chief lab technician, to the MUFON lab in Missouri. She analyzed it with an X-ray fluoroscope gun, and she couldn't determine what it was at all. Her quote to me was that it's either something that's an element not in the periodic table, it's some sort of odd alloy, or it's not metal at all. And she tested the gun beforehand on aluminum, which is the standard test that they do, and the gun was working fine. So she couldn't figure out what it was. So I said, I'd like to present it at the symposium, and I'd also like to get it tested with an electron microscope, which was her suggestion. And so she mailed it to me, and it was a little white box. My mail clerk said that she put it in my mailbox. I got the confirmation on my telephone, and when I went the next day to pick it up, it was not there. Okay, the cameras in my mailroom, I live in a community in the Poconos, and all of the cameras were turned away from the wall where the mailboxes were, mysteriously. So anybody could have walked in the side door with a master key and, abscond with it. Luckily, the fellow in Moscow had more samples of it. I says, you keep some, try sending us another one. And we had to go about doing it in such a roundabout way, because you can't send things directly from Russia because of the Ukraine war. It had to go through a third country. We were afraid of it getting robbed again. So we were sending letters to the receiving end people in the mail saying, you're going to get something in the mail. Let us know when you get it. We had to go through this whole skullduggery thing, cloak and dagger. And it ended up getting held up in customs for 17 days. And we thought that was the end of it. And the other day I got word that it's in our possession, that our courier has it, and he's bringing it to the symposium. I reached out to Kutztown University, and their electron microscope team is going to analyze it more after the symposium. But at this point, we don't know what it is. And that's going to be what we present as the opening case Saturday night. And I believe then it will be the Oregon case, and then Ron has 2 more.
Now, just I don't quite understand. So he supposedly summoned a craft in, and how did the material?
He said he was in contact with a entity named Timacue, and Timacue over the course of a week began making things materialize around him. Timacue told him that it was debris from his spacecraft. Then Timacue stopped answering his questions and disappeared on him and never reappeared again. But he ended up with about 12 pieces of material, very lightweight, sort of black. When Lynn Mann printed out the spectroscope analysis of it, she says it was off the charts. She said, Bob, I never saw anything like this in my entire life. But it's sort of a black, metally, plasticky material. So it could be, it's definitely manufactured. it seems like we don't have a standard to go against it with. But Lynn has a big book where she can look to see if certain types of alloys are being manufactured on Earth at this time now or in the past, and it just didn't match up to anything.
It's just kind of a puzzling statement, you know, that all of a sudden this stuff would materialize from some entity. You know, I mean, it really makes you wonder on that one to begin with, you know, because is this being saying that his craft crashed and here's the debris, or?
Yeah, and the fellow wasn't even sure when the craft crashed or whatever. We just know that the stuff began materializing. We didn't believe him at the beginning. We thought he was a typical contactee like Adamski or something.
Yeah.
But when two labs said this is unusual, I don't know. The guy seems very sincere, but I don't know if he's crazy or whatever. But so far, the material does not match anything that we can determine.
Well, I guess,
Martin, strange things are afoot.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're noticing is that there's always been a very clandestine effort to get to and remove any potential crash debris, materials, anything like that away from public scrutiny, from public viewing. There are very sophisticated teams that do this, and even like Linda Moulton Howe's piece of we covered new evidence about that is absolutely stunning, and that was secreted away. As soon as TTSA was formulated, off to come get it. There are people and organizations going very, very deep whose job it is to make sure that materials of unknown origin ever see a network of private labs that can analyze this stuff and publish the results. This stuff always disappears. It always gets co-opted. It's a pattern. And what happened with our post office box, people are kind of criticizing us for using the post office, but if we would have sent that Federal Express, we would have sent it any of the other services. If they wanted it, they're going to get on it. So using the post office wasn't a bad choice. But the thing is somebody was willing to commit a federal offense to get to that stuff. And
the other thing is that people think like, we're this massive global corporation, MUFON, all right? We're a small group of volunteers, all right? So we don't have people that can drive cross country to Missouri to a lab to do it, until we got burned once. This time we're bringing the second sample right to the symposium to hand off to somebody else who can get it to the lab that it's supposed to go to. But I mean, we only can do that once a year. It's like we don't have people driving all over the country, with just to deliver samples of possible UFO debris.
Sure. And we learned our lesson.
Yeah.
I had a woman, Julie Olson, on my show who there was a debris left when everyone saw this UFO, and it looks like a little piece of an exhaust pipe. There was like 3 of them that were left in her driveway, burned holes through the snow and everything. And she picked them up, and I said, do you still have it? So after I did the show with her, I had all kinds of, people saying, oh, she should do this and that, and, get Gary, what's his name, involved. But he I'm just trying to.
Gary's a little snowed under with people that wanted to analyze stuff.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, it didn't go to him, but I was contacted by Klaus Vaughn in Sweden, and he said, we have people over here. We'd love to have it and analyze it. And so I connected the two. She ships it over, and I do believe it was FedEx. And it ended up being like lost, never delivered. And then finally and it cost her like $300 to ship it over there, and ended up finally coming all the way back to the States, back to her. But she did get it back. But it's like she's telling me, she's asking me, should I do it again? And I don't know what to say, because it always seems like a
call
problem.
her up and tell her to send it to us.
I can. I mean, that was, I don't know why that didn't, how would that work exactly? I mean, we can talk about this off air. I think that'd be better. But
we talk about it off the air. But let's just say we won't be using the post office, and we won't be telegraphing the process.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
the point I was actually trying to come around full circle to earlier is that materials are finding their way to the domain in very strange ways. And the story that this guy in Russia has told us, we would normally put that in the gray box and that's where it would stay, except that there's anomalous results from these tests. And it's starting to emerge that experiencers are being given little bits and pieces of tangible evidence. It's a trend that is very early in its stages, but I have a feeling that, you know, experiencers are about to have their day. We just had UFOs had their day, UAP, to the point where they're finally admitted and acknowledged. And the experiencers are still out there on the fringe, but science and reality is catching up. And the experiencer phenomenon, I believe, is going to be the next realm where we get some scientific validation, where no longer do these people have to live with this thing that maybe they're crazy. Because we're going to find out that there's legitimacy to non-human intelligences using methods of communication that we're not fully aware of. And so when things start appearing in the lives of people and they are told intuitively that there's something to this object or there's something to this material that just showed up in your house, go get it tested. That could very well be, we could very well be seeing the beginning of a trend of bypassing the ability of government, bypassing the ability of crash retrieval teams and everything else to get to this stuff and keep it away from us, because it's going to just kind of pop up. And, you know, I know that sounds far-fetched, but nothing about the experiencer phenomenon surprises me anymore, especially when you start thinking about how it ties into the nature of reality and all of the things we don't understand. So the idea that some form of disclosure, some form of hard evidence would be taking this kind of very esoteric route, I think we might want to get used to the idea that it might be possible at the very least.
Huh? You know, I always think, you know, oh, why, you know, when these people are talking about, you know, going into a ship or whatever, or what, you know, whatever they're talking about, and you always think about why isn't there, you know, any more tangible evidence in some type of way. But I mean, like when Travis Walton supposedly grabbed that instrument or whatever, and why couldn't he have taken that home? You know, it'd be really something to it if you know, I mean, the idea, we don't even know if these things are interdimensional or from another planet, or, you know, what if
all of the above, probably,
or all of the above. That's probably right. And the materials, you know, a lot has to be based on an alloy, because I think probably throughout the universe, you know, the elements are pretty much similar, or I mean the same, I would think. There may be new elements that we don't know about.
Well, it's like
But
Michio Kaku. When I interviewed him for Accidental Truth, he's, you know, arguably the world's most famous physicist, and he said, if you're on the spaceship, steal something, for crying out loud. And that's kind of what you're saying about Travis.
yeah.
There's probably a lot of reasons why nobody's walking off these ships with physical samples, and it probably has a lot to do with the way they're treated and controlled when they're there. But you know, it is a good point. So for people looking for a reason to poo-poo people who say they've been on board craft, that gives them a little bit of ammunition, you have to admit.
Yeah. Now, what about, you know, just to go off topic a little bit here, what about implants? Have they ever really, you know, measured anything unusual enough to make it, like, you know, do you know anything about either one of you know anything about that?
Well,
Roger Lear did a lot of studies on implants. He said the very last ones before he passed away said they had evidence of nanotechnology, but he couldn't. He never had the money to do the big tests. He would go to the UFO conferences, and he'd be literally trying to raise money to do tests, or for a variety of other things. And him and I were fairly close right before he passed away, and it was a shame that he was never able to really test this stuff. And now we're at a point where new technologies that weren't on our radar screen back then, things like atomic level 3D printing, things like nanotechnology. The last time some of this stuff was looked at under an electron microscope, we didn't have that. And so some of these samples are still out there. And MUFON just had an implant case, and we gave it to DTSA, and it found its way to Gary Nolan. And it never got tested because of legal reasons that they ran into. And we got the sample back. The chain of custody was messed up. The condition of the sample was messed up. And we're constantly. I think Bob's got some interesting implant stuff that just happened.
Well, we have somebody just claimed that they were abducted, and that very similar to the 1950s Brazil case, the sexual abduction of Antonio Villaboas, where he had a gel spread all over his body. He thought either to decontaminate him or to arouse him sexually for the little woman that came in and had sex with him. But this witness also claimed that they were covered by little grays with a gelatin, and they had the foreknowledge to actually collect some of it later on and put it in a bottle. And we now have that at the MUFON lab, and we're going to be doing DNA testing on it to see if it's valid or not. Of course, until we do the DNA test, we won't know. The other interesting thing is last year, when I was in MUFON headquarters, they were allowing me to go through some old boxes of stuff because I was working on the Project Aquarius Digital Library, and I found a bag of dirt. And it turns out that it's all of the samples from the 1980s Delphos, Kansas case.
Oh, yeah.
Where the UFO
circle.
left the circle, the mother touched it, it numbed up her whole hand.
Yeah.
We found the dirt again. Now, there have been scientists over the decades that have tested this dirt, but now in 2024 we have the ability to test it again with all of this new technology. So that's going to be going to the MUFON lab, and we're hand delivering that too. No more U.S. Postal Service. So yeah, so we have two really good samples to work with in the coming months.
Now, when you say the MUFON lab, is it just something that they contract directly?
No, we funded it ourselves through donations, and we have MUFON, a lab technician who actually runs it. And they get a small stipend every month. They just purchased the DNA machine, and they have various types of microscopes and X-ray fluorescence guns and things like that. We're hoping to get our own electron microscope, but right now we have to go to like Kutztown University to do stuff like that. But we do have a DNA machine.
The DNA machine.
So this is a good time to mention
expensive.
Anybody out there that wants to donate an extra scanning electron microscope to MUFON, we'd be happy to accept it. Just
used.
Yeah, it has been. If you think about it, I mean, now is different, but until 2017 came along, it's like very little science really wanted to get involved in taking a look at what I think is one of the biggest puzzles there is to solve. And it's kind of a shame, but now it seems like people are taking it more serious. Avi Loeb would have never happened. I don't think, people like that would have never come forward with the claims and looking at things, with a curiosity instead of thinking about funding or whatever it is that made them not look at this topic, besides, the stigma of it all.
It's been the ridicule factor. It's been the stigma. And one thing that really shocks me as I learn more about labs and how they work, like MUFON's lab is what you would call a level 1 lab. So we have very basic stuff, but we're not going to be able to go in there with $1 million machines and do, the high-end things that you'll find on college campuses. But different labs they're very selective about the stuff they'll study sometimes. And the thing that's really strange is that they're very selective about the results they're willing to acknowledge. So in other words, you could give a sample to, say, a university lab to do an electron scanning electron microscope, which examines it at a microscopic level and also has the ability to detect items in the periodic charts and identify what's in it. But whether or not they're going to say, oh, this is an unknown specimen, we can't identify it, we don't know what it is, possibly alien. None of them are ever going to say, oh, it's possibly alien. And they're going to be very, very careful about what they say. So you could pay for a lot of very expensive testing and still get ambiguous results. And so as we learn how to navigate the way laboratories work and the way the ridicule factor plays in, the labs don't want to sign off on stuff that are far-fetched claims because that's their reputation. And then there's way too many instances of things just not coming back. And so, as more and more stuff gets into the public domain that needs to be analyzed, we need reputable labs that are willing to take risks. with coming and being accountable for their results. And we need our own equipment, and we need our own pipelines where we can trust moving the stuff around, because it's really coming to that. When samples are disappearing out of mailboxes, this game is starting to intensify. And the more stuff that comes into the public domain, like Joe Farmer from Alabama finds a piece of metal in his field, and he gets it to a lab, and no government people, no crash retrieval teams, nobody gets to it before it gets analyzed and the results are made public. That's a whole new pipeline that has its own complications that we're just now learning how difficult it actually is to make that work.
What were you saying, Bob?
I was just going to say, even Lynn Mann at our lab, she'll never say, "Oh, I don't know what this is. It must be extraterrestrial." Her reports are very cut and dry. I couldn't identify it. Here's the spectrographic analysis. Bang, that's it. She'll never say it's interdimensional, it's extraterrestrial, because how could you answer something like that if you're a professional?
Yeah.
Well, isotopic ratios is one way, but because like you could have a piece of iron and you can literally analyze it and tell what geographical part of the globe that piece of iron came from. And so some of the samples that Lou Elizondo knows about, he says that the thing that makes them very interesting is isotopic ratios that do not match anything that is consistent with having been made on Earth. And
Right.
So we do have that, but those are inconclusive, and Bob's 100% right. Nobody is going to step forward and say, oh, these are of alien origin. There's really no way to prove that, except through isotopic ratios, but then people say that's not definitive proof either. So far, we definitely can't come forward and say that unknown material is of extraterrestrial origin, and we would never expect a lab to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that I would guess, now I don't know, but I would guess that you probably, when you're bringing something to a lab, you're not going to say, we think it's extraterrestrial. You're just going to bring it to them and say, would you please analyze this? Or do they want a backstory on something?
A lot of them want a backstory. Bob, you're working with the new lab that's doing the scanning electron microscope test. Did they want information about what it was, where we got it, what we were trying to find out, or they just agree?
Well, the way I presented it to them was that we want to use it in a movie, and so that I was part of a production company, and that we'd like to get tested to see whether it's worthy or not to be put into the movie. So they were fine with that.
So they got a backstory whether they wanted it or not. A lot of these labs will refuse to analyze stuff that could be of that kind of origin. And so, like I said, it's a very interesting pipeline that we're all still learning, how it works and how to make it work better. A company called Falcon Space, it was just on Vetted. They got a piece of the molten cow debris, and they analyzed it. And we found out some very interesting things about that debris as well. One of them is, you remember how back in the day, I think it came out in the 1990s, it had these ultra thin layers of, I think it was the bismuth or the zinc, and there was really no consensus on how such a thin layer of metal could appear really anywhere. But today we don't have it yet, but we have the idea that we might be able to accomplish molecular and atomic level 3D printing. When they were trying to figure that out in the 90s, that stuff wasn't even on our radar screen. I mean, maybe at DARPA, but not in the public domain. So it was impossible to speculate about how that thin layer happened. Nobody had a good explanation. But now we have an explanation. Yeah, it was printed. It was this whole skin is layered metal that is waveguides, just like they said. So the new tests using new technologies and new ways of understanding this stuff is shedding a new light on those metallic samples from the 90s, and that's what Falcon Space just helped to accomplish.
Now, there's these people that have come forward over the years, and they always think they have crash debris from Roswell. Has any of them ever, samples and stuff, has any of them ever panned out to be something unusual that either one of you are aware of?
That's pretty funny, because the fourth case we're presenting on Saturday night is exactly that. I'm working on a project with Warren from KRGA, with Toby from the Roswell Daily Record. The three of us are producing a new docuseries called Roswell Breakthrough, marked by the sky, and we have samples, new samples that nobody's seen, and this is another thing that we're going to be talking about at the symposium. One of the samples is it has elements of aluminum, but it also has other elements, and the scientists that analyzed it said that the material itself exhibited signs of being subjected to ultra high temperatures and things consistent with a crash. And so we have that. It's in a safe, and yeah, we're going to be rolling it out in the film and a little bit about it at the symposium. So yes, Roswell, I call it the gift that keeps on giving. It's just every time you think it's case closed, it's done, something else comes up.
One of the things about the material that was described by Jesse Marcel was that, you fold it up and it goes back into the shape. Sounds like Kevlar or something. But then he said, when you hit it with a hammer or sledgehammer, I think he might have said, he said you couldn't damage it. But then the question always comes to me, then why did it blow into smithereens? Why was it, everywhere over a debris field? How did that happen? I mean, that is such a puzzle. Roswell is such a puzzle. The whole thing.
A thought experiment. If you have a skin that's a flying structure. Yeah.
Whoop.
Uh-oh.
We're having a little bit of internet issue there, Ron. So I don't know. Ron, I'm sorry. We have a little bit of an internet issue there. You just went out a little bit. So yeah, you're having your freeze up, Ron. So why don't you drop out and come in? And do you have anything you can add to that?
No, Ron also has another presentation at night where he has even more samples. So the materials presentation Saturday night is going to be just that. We have a lot to present. The case that Ron didn't talk about yet has actually been tested by a government lab and found to be unusual. So that I'll let him talk about when he comes back on, but I see he's still frozen. So just let me mention this while I have a little bit of time. We're actually doing 4 cases of interest presentations because they've been so popular. I usually do the regular cases of interest presentation on Saturday afternoon, where we pick a whole bunch of cases that have either been tested at our lab or our photo analysis team has looked into them. Earl Gray will be doing an ERT cases of interest presentation on Sunday. And also, Ron and I will be doing the materials presentation on Saturday night. So people love it at the symposiums when we do cases of interest of all different types. And this year's going to probably be the best cases of interest presentations we've ever put on.
Well, Ron, you seem to be back and unfrozen, but let me continue on with that. Are these actually going to be shown, these samples actually going to be shown in some type of showcase or something like that? Or is it just going to be on a screen?
The Russian sample is going to be opened. The second recovered Russian sample, we're going to open it right out of the envelope in the presentation.
Oh,
so we're going to need armed bodyguards. All right. And Ron, I mentioned briefly when you froze the 4th set of cases that you're going to do. That with the material that was tested already by the government lab. I didn't give anything away. Did you want to talk about that?
We have these tiny little orbs, for lack of a better word, that look to be some sort of containment vessel for biology. And, for lack of a better way to classify them, they're almost like eggs, but nobody's been able to figure out what they would be eggs from or why they would contain the biology that they contain. One of the very first people that analyzed this, these samples that we're going to be sharing at the symposium have been analyzed by the National Institutes of Health. The NSA got a hold of some of it and shared some preliminary results and then ghosted the person who turned them in. The man who wrote the book about panspermia was one of the very first people to analyze these, and he floated the possibility that these are actually meteoroids that are an example of how life might be used to transfer stuff across space and deliver to planets. And so It's a very interesting strand. We're not saying that we're not floating this as truth. We don't know yet, but there has been a lot of investigations into this material. We're going to be sharing it at the symposium, and some of it is very compelling. And so far, there's no definitive conclusion about what this stuff is, except that it with
look like he's frozen again. So I don't know if you can continue on with what he's saying there. Bob?
Yeah, well, I know that the NSA did preliminary results and that they were unusual, and then the person that gave them the material, they sort of like went silent on her after that. So I believe Ron's actually going to be showing physical examples of that material also. So at the symposium, we're going to be showing you the Delphos dirt, the little eggs, and also the Russian material that might be some sort of debris. So yeah, we're not going to do hands-on where you can touch it, but we're not just going to show you a screenshot of it either.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it looks like he's unfrozen. I'm going to try him back.
Sorry, guys. You know, it seems like every time I'm talking about delicate things on podcasts, it's the only time my internet glitches.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it's another one of those cases where we're going to present what we've been shown. We're in the middle of our own investigation, and that's where it's at. And one guy came up to me. I showed some of this at a conference in Oregon, and he says, "Well, I'm a biologist, and I think those might be insect eggs." And I'm like, "Well, I'd be happy to give you a sample." He never got back to me, but when I went back to the person that had it, she was very clear. If they were insect eggs, we would have figured that out a long time ago. And plus, these samples are now, you know, some of them are almost 20 years old, and they're still holding up. Whereas insect eggs would be, you know, they would die and be broken down biologically. These are still intact. And so we don't know what it is, and maybe the internet can help us figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that you never know. I remember talking to Ray Stanford way back when I very first started, and he told me about when he showed up at Socorro, and down were the 3 landing pads, marked. He said, I believe he said J. Allen Hynek was there at the time when he was there, and he said that nobody really took much notice, but he noticed like a white line on a rock. And so he went back when everyone was gone and pulled out this rock, and there was clearly a metal streak on it. So he took that he told me he knew someone at NASA in Maryland at the Goddard Space Center. And I actually went there at Goddard and saw the James Webb when it was being constructed. That was pretty cool. But anyway, he had someone test it. And all of a sudden, like the person that tested it was gone, and he was real leery of it. And then he finally got the rock back, and there was nothing on it, and no one had any test.
That happens a lot. I mean, anytime, especially with NASA, anytime that you try to turn in stuff to any government operation, if there's anything anomalous about it, you're not going to get it back. There's dozens of cases of stuff being turned over. Government bodies for analysis, and the stuff something gets returned that isn't what they were initially given. The results are completely inconclusive. This happens all the time, but that's going to get harder and harder as more and more stuff turns up that they can't do this with, and as more and more laboratories get versed in doing these analysis. So all we can hope is that at some point we're going to get something solid and tangible that we can get to a lab and release to the public without any interference from the powers that be. But there seems to be a pattern that as soon as the powers that be, whoever they are, know about the existence of something like that, they're pretty good at stealing it, for lack of a better word.
How many old films and videos have disappeared? If you ever saw the catalog from the 1950s of all of the UFO films that were taken, you can't find them today. And the stories include the government said, "Oh, we're going to analyze it when they get it back. If they ever do get it back, that piece of the clip is missing. It's been re-edited. So it's not only samples, but it's movies and videos also."
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, here's something that's interesting, and this has happened to me twice, just in the last couple of months. When I first started trying to research this squadron that was supposedly flying F-94 jets in the 1950s in Oregon, I was able to find a Wikipedia page that had this, that there was an actual squadron, and it was a civil air defense squadron, and it was disbanded in the middle of 1955. Well, when I went back to find that and get a screenshot of it, it was gone.
Ah,
And so that happened. There's another thing where there's a letter from Hal Puthoff that he wrote to Linda Moulton Howe. I knew exactly where it was. When I went back to get it, it was gone. And it was a very important letter about the crash material that she had that he wrote back in the 1990s. And so I pretty much live with the realization that everything I do online is being tracked. When I made Accidental Truth, I would come home, and there was a couple times when things were moved in my house. I would wake up in the middle of the night, and my computer's just chattering away, and I could see that massive amounts of data are being transferred. And so I just got used to the idea that, you know, you don't live, you have no privacy when you're in this field. If you're doing anything, they're watching and listening, and you're only getting away with what they allow you to get away with. So when I go to find something that was just there on the web and it's gone, I just roll my eyes, and I'm like, well, there it goes. So
yeah, I remember Lee Spiegel finding something to do with the Air Force training, and it was a whole chapter on UFOs. And when he went and made a big deal about it, it vanished.
yep.
He told me that story. Totally
So I
vanished.
can tell people, if you stumble across something on the web and you think you can go back for it later, you might not be able to. So download it, screenshot it, do whatever you can when you find it, because if you make any noise about it, it's gonna disappear if it means anything.
Right. Well, I really enjoy both of your research, and Bob, when I saw you in Pine Bush, you know, just when you were talking about the statistics, all that stuff is really fascinating. You really do a deep dive into the research that you do, and I'm just commending you, because I think it's great work that you do.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's a never-ending study, really, right? I mean, you devoted a lot of time into looking at. I mean, how much?
I feel it's all about patterns. It's like I find one case that's unusual. I don't only go to the MUFON CMS, I go to the old APRO files, the old CUFOS database, the NICAP chronology. I have 800 books in my library on you. It's like you start seeing the same thing over and over again. You find it happening just in the east coast of Australia, within a 60-mile radius, over 30 years, the same phenomenon happening. I believe that the answer is going to be found in the patterns. And when AI gets to the point where, you know, it's really up and running, and you crunch all of this data, I believe that the answers are going to be amazing.
I got to tell you a quick story, because it's one of my most fascinating interviews, I think, and it's a short one. This guy named Albert Wayne, he was in the 1970s. He's driving from, I think it was either Massachusetts, somewhere down to New York. He's on I-95. This craft comes in. He thinks it's a plane crashing. He sees this thing. It's got a ball on each protruding ball, like on each corner. That's like a light, and then it all of a sudden appears right over him. He sees hominids. He's with his girlfriend. There's all these cars that stop on 95, and they're all together watching this thing. And then the thing basically goes away and shoots off. And then he looks over at his girlfriend and he said, "Everything's okay. Let's go get an ice cream." And then every car gets back on 95. They all pull off on the first exit. They all pull into a Howard Johnson's, and they all go in and get ice cream. Now tell me, have you ever heard of a pattern like that?
That's interesting.
Yeah. But he had this, he said, this guy is such a credible guy too. It's not like, just someone, I don't know. I don't know how to compare him, but he's extremely credible.
It's clearly an insidious plot hatched by Dairy Queen and
from another dimension. Yeah.
So let me just make sure everybody knows, because we haven't mentioned it really. All of this stuff that we're talking about, you're going to be able to see live. If you go to MUFONSymposium.com, you can get the live stream. It includes the entire symposium, including a keynote from Bob Salas, who's going to be talking about the UFOs and nukes incident, which never gets old, and his presentations are always compelling. Then you'll get all the rest of the symposium speakers. You'll get Bob and my presentation live on Saturday night. You'll get the cases of interest on Sunday, which wraps up the symposium, and all of the other cool stuff that goes on for the whole weekend. It's $99, the least expensive UFO symposium live stream in the field. And it's going to be very compelling, especially Saturday night. It's going to be a heck of a show. And you can get your live stream access at MUFONSymposium.com. And yeah, please just come join us and be a part of it. You also get a whole year of MUFON TV with that. So you can watch our 700 UFO related videos on the channel, and you can watch the symposium anytime you want for the next year. So
and
there's
just
the sales
videos. Pitch. Wow.
MUFON Television has 700 plus, no commercials, no ads, no weird tracking stuff that we subject you to. It's just a very cut and dry basic website with the MUFON symposiums, original shows that we like, different things that we add all the time. And so it's really cool. But if you go to MUFONSymposium.com, you can sign up, and this is going to be like the coolest UFO presentation of the year. It's something that you want to be there for.
Now, this also is something that you don't have to watch it live. You can watch it afterwards, like it's going to be recorded.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Once you have access to it, if you're not there live, you'll have access to it for a year on MUFON Television, as well as all of our other stuff. So you don't have to be there in the room to enjoy it. You can watch it anytime afterwards as well.
Yeah.
And just so people know, if they're not going to the symposium and they do want to watch it live, it starts Friday night, the 12th of July. All right, the end of next week, and it runs till the 14th. July 12th to the 14th will be the MUFON Symposium in Dallas, Texas.
It's really Irving, but it's right next to Dallas. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna go to Daily Plaza. I got to check out that whole Kennedy stuff. It'll be great to be there and to see you both, and just for the listener to know that I'm going to have everything posted down in the show notes, the links and all that to the symposium. And yeah, I'm really excited to be there and to see you guys again, hang out and see these great presentations. And the material stuff to me is fascinating. And I think, I don't know if it's going to be any answer to anything, but it might move the needle a little bit, if something can't be explained.
Well, at the end of the day, the unexplainable does not offer explanations, but it offers evidence of, if you can't explain it, then, you can't explain it. And if you can't explain it, then it's got to have some kind of answer that is beyond what we're willing to accept as answers now. So just the evidence of the unexplained, the evidence of the materials unknown, the evidence of bacteriological specimens encased in weird little shells. The fact that this stuff exists and nobody can explain it is an explanation in itself.
That's a title for a new movie for you. Evidence of the Unexplained. I like that.
Yeah, it sounds like three History Channel shows combined into one title.
All right, guys. Well, again, I'm really looking forward to meeting up with you in Texas. And thanks so much for your time tonight.
Martin, always a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you, Martin.
All right. Take care. We'll be back next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.